think people just aren't educated on what all goes into creating like a full landscape project. I think it's easy for people to do like little DIY pieces, but then it turns into an uncohesive space.
Hmm.
And then there's things that get missed.
So many things. I definitely come across some obstacles. There are either people that really know that they need a landscape design, and I don't really think they understand how badly they need it often. And what's included in a landscape design is also something to really consider. But just in general, getting a 2D layout, getting a 3D concept design initially, it's like, how do you know what you're going to do until you see it? How do you know what it's going to look like until you see it? That's where the 3D is so helpful. A lot of people uh, sort of come with us saying, "Well, I know what I want, so I don't think I need a design.
Mhm.
How do we know what to build?" And then you've got the different material choices, you've got the different colors, the different shades. You got all the different options that you may not have considered as well. And so, you know, our landscape design team will receive what the client wants. And then if it's a flawless idea, it works practically, everything makes sense, then great. We don't need to change anything. But otherwise, of course, we infuse our ideas into it to make sure it's practical, to make sure it adds a lot of value, to make sure it speaks to who the client is and what their values are. But without that design, man, the biggest reason is like clear, transparent communication of exactly what is going to happen on this project, exactly how long it's going to take, and exactly how much it's going to cost. And so the biggest motivating factor, I think, for a lot of people is cost control. It's so easy to think your project's going to cost you 100 grand or 50 grand, and you haven't considered A, B, C, D, and E. And, when you start a project without a design, the landscape contractor can suppose it's going to cost 100 grand, but it ends up costing 200 grand. This happens time and time again because all the little considerations haven't been considered. The little obstacles haven't been foreseen. So a landscape design, and not just a landscape design, but a good landscape design, it foresees all of these challenges, foresees all of these obstacles, in addition to really honing in what the client and the property really need and value.
What's the benefit to having someone who's specific to landscape design versus having your home designer also design your backyard?
Yeah, that's a good question because often we'll get 3D mock-ups from interior designers or builders and saying, yeah, we don't need design. This is what we want. I mean, that's a great starting point for us because it helps us understand clearly the look you're going for and the look that you want. But then the realities of the site need to be considered at that point. And, what is it going to cost? It's really easy to dream up a beautiful, glorious backyard without considering the two major things, the practicalities of the actual land itself. And like, can you actually build that kind of structure here? Does permitting allow it for one? But then how much is it actually going to cost? So like a design, it's not just about getting this concept done and saying, yeah, that's what I want. It's about starting at that point and then reverse engineering it to work out exactly how much it's going to cost. Now you see a price, you see a design, you're like, wow, I didn't realize it was going to cost me $400,000. I only want to spend $200,000. And so now we rework the design to fit that budget as best we can. And all of this we know upfront because we're looking at all the little details. We're doing our site analysis, getting the grades, getting the square footage, looking at the substrate as much as we can.
Do you find that because landscape designers are experts in their industry, that they know the regulations and permitting that's required better than the home builder would?
Ideally, just to be frank there, yes and no. There are a lot of landscape designers that haven't the faintest idea. Home builders deal with regulations a lot more than landscapers do. I mean, not a high percentage at all of landscape projects go through a permitting process. And so a lot of designers aren't trained in that. It's interesting because a lot of landscape architects are trained on, more municipal and commercial development type of designs, and they are trained in backyard renovations. They're not trained on that period. And so the next is like a landscape designer, and they don't really have that formal training. And so there's a big gap. And so I've had numerous landscape architects in-house over the last 15 years. And the major reason they come on board is because they want to learn more about the residential market. Unofficially trained landscape designer, not a landscape architect, and building these projects over the course of 15 years, I've got this experience of the practical component and the experience in dealing with clients, residential clients who are emotionally invested in their design. It's a financial consideration, but it's also an emotional consideration. So how are they going to spend their time with their partner in the evening? Do they have children, their dog, all of that kind of stuff? Like, are they going to enjoy their space? It's such an emotional investment. And it's only through experience that you really learn how to navigate that and how important it is that that is infused into the landscape design. And so when it comes back down to your question, every city is different. Every house even can be different than the one next to them. And so it's pretty hard. There's, your general bylaws, of course, but it's pretty hard to know exactly what is and isn't permitted. But it's also important to know what is or isn't structurally sound. Yeah, there's one project we're working on right now, and we had initially spec'd concrete walls, and the client wanted to change it to cinder block walls. And we did that with 2/3 of the walls. But there was one particular wall that just needed the structural integrity of a concrete wall and the footing rather than what the cinder block wall could provide. So these like more practical considerations with the experience of one being a landscape designer or architect, but also having the experience of a landscape builder, contractor, are really what make a good design when they're fused together. Without that, I think you get a design that just shows you the concept again. Like we do in the past have received many designs from landscape designers that just don't have the experience of building these. And their ideal of what they want to do with the land, it just doesn't make sense. Or, where there is no retaining wall, they actually need a 3-foot retaining wall. Or where there's a 1-foot retaining wall in the design, actually it needs to be a 4-foot retaining wall. So many misses like this, which can have tens of thousands of dollars of cost implications once the project begins. And so, but I often say, if your budget's 100 grand and you start a project and it costs you 150 grand, that, I guess, how do I say this? I don't know how I say it, so I just keep going on this, but like, wouldn't you rather know that it's going to cost 150 grand up front so you can then make an informed decision of, well, I'm going to save this till next year till I get the funds, or you have time to readjust your goals, or you have time to redesign to get it back down to 100. So many people find themselves in that position and they're used to it because a home build easily goes from 1 million to 1.3. And that's just the way it goes. But with a landscape project, it should be quoted. It shouldn't be time plus billing. It should be a fixed price quote that is based on a very detailed design. And that's how you get a successful project with cost control.
Mhm. That makes sense. And then with the homeowners in mind, when they're spending this kind of money, their top concerns are going to be how long is this going to last and what's the sustainability of the project? Like, am I going to have to be retreating the wood deck in 2 years and have an additional cost? So, how does a landscape designer take all of that into account to give them the longevity of the project that it's not going to be another $50,000 5 years down the road?
Yeah, yeah, good question. It really is very dependent on the person. Some people really just focus on the aesthetics and the beauty, or they're focusing on selling the house in a couple of years. And so those considerations aren't always front of mind. But for someone who is going to be living at the house and it is like their retirement plan or something like that, there are a lot of new materials coming to the market that are just a lot more sustainable and a lot more environmentally friendly, a lot more low maintenance, in our climate, being coastal with all the rain, it really is harsh. But often you got to spend more up front in order to mitigate that maintenance cost or repair cost down the line. And that sometimes pushes people away from making those decisions. But again, it's really just about information. And a good landscape designer should be presenting all of this information, presenting the pros and cons of the different material selections, presenting the different price options with each material selection, and assisting the client making an informed decision. To me, that goes beyond what most landscape designers do or even are capable of doing. But to me, it's fundamental as a landscape design build firm. it- just having a good design isn't enough. It needs to consider all of those fundamentals of sustainability, longevity. Does it align with your values? Is it going to cost more to maintain later on, or do you want to pay a higher cost right now? And in order to make those decisions, we need to consider all the pros and cons of all the micro decisions. And that's where a design can get quite involving. And there is such thing as decision fatigue in a design, and particularly if you've just renovated your house and you go through the design. And so it can't all be done in the very upfront stage of a landscape design when your build might be 6 months away. And so we get the general concept. We do make all of the big decisions, but of course, as we start the project or get into the project planning stage, there's many more micro decisions that need to be made. And so the design sort of continues through, even through the construction phase, at least all the way up to the planting or the lighting, which is one of the last things we do. You don't need to know in this, as we're doing the design, exactly what lights you're going to use. That decision fatigue hits. But as we're preparing for the landscape lights, that's when we, throughout the construction project, start offering brochures, material packages for the different light options and price options. And that's sort of how we extend out the micro decisions to minimize design fatigue as best we can.
Design fatigue and decision fatigue is a real thing.
I've been there.
Oh, I've been there too. So when it comes to having people understand why they need a landscape designer for their project, what is the biggest misconception that you come across?
So in terms of like, why do I even need a design?
Why do I even need to bring in a landscape designer? Why
Yeah.
can't I have you come in and do what I'm thinking?
Yeah. Because I don't know what you're thinking. And because let's just say I'm colorblind and you say you want it red and I give it to you green.
Do you have a hard time when do you find quite often that people will have something in their head that they want and they can't easily verbalize that so that you can just pick up on it and know what they're talking about?
Yeah, that does happen. I guess through imagery, Googling images, it's kind of easy enough to get to that point of seeing what it is they're trying to achieve. But the challenge is I'm not going to be the one building it. And so there's like, the Chinese whispers of this is what the client wants. And then you tell that to your project manager, who tells it to the foreman, who tells it to the skilled laborers or the subcontractors. And it can be so misconstrued or misunderstood so easily. When you have a design, there is no misinterpretation available. And if there is, it's an error or a mistake of the contractor. It's not on the client's responsibility. So a good design really puts that responsibility onto the contractor to make sure they're interpreting things correctly. Where it gets challenging for clients, I think, to make good decisions is you may want to choose, you may say, well, I've got a friend who does landscaping and he's the guy that's going to be doing the work. So I don't need a design because I'm going to just tell him, you know, but as soon as you're more of a mid-size company, you have multiple people doing the work, multiple managers. You need this clear, concise instruction of how to do it to make sure that we're all on the same page, client all the way through to the laborer. And the challenge of using, the owner operator who's doing the work is the reliability and the quality of the work. Whereas when you hire this more of a company size, small, medium, large company who's got the systems in place, who's got the SOPs, who's got the training, and who's got the credibility and the long-standing name, you're going to get what you're paying for. Their business is set up to foresee things in advance and communicate around change orders and cost controls Whereas these smaller owner operators, they just don't have that experience. They don't have that exposure. They don't have the systems. It's so important to, I started there, so I don't want to trash those owner operators because there are some brilliant owner operators out there. We've got some great relationships with some of them, but they bring us in to manage the project and we use them as a subcontractor. There's like 14 different trades or something within the landscaping realm. A small owner operator, you can't be great at everything. You know, there are those owner operators that do a bit of masonry, do a bit of concrete, do a bit of carpentry, do a bit of planting, do a bit of paving and hardscaping or retaining walls. And sure, they might be like 6, 7 out of 10 at them all, which is amazing. You just can't get the high caliber of work when you are using sort of one small organization. You've got to use a larger organization that can use specialists in all those different areas and manage the project efficiently and smoothly in the communications with the client. And so there's the big difference. And this is what a design really helps with.
So, final question. Why should I choose Hyland for my landscape designer
Mm,
or
yeah.
as designer?
Well, I love that question. There's so much knowledge within our organization and it's so diverse. Like if I think to my business partner, Jason, he's the construction guy, he's the project manager guy, he's the guy that's built all of these things with his hands. And now he's a leader of the teams that build all of these things. And he knows the pains of core design for one of them. Myself started there as well in that same boat, but I've also been designing and setting up these projects for 15 years, anywhere from a $10,000 tiny little project to a $2 million massive project, residential. So in addition to that, we have a landscape architect who's been trained in the residential market. We work together for many years now. And so our design team isn't just a, creative designer making it look gorgeous on paper that you fall in love with it. This is what it's going to cost. How much do you actually really want to spend now that you're fully informed in what things cost? And then we go back to the drawing board, we revise, we review, we revise, we review, and we find the right point where it's, where the client's ready to move forward. And so the infusion of this diverse expertise, which is so far beyond what most landscape design firms have, and the infusion of the alignment between budget and the design is everything. To me, I think, why would you pay money for a design if you can't be sure you're ready to execute it at the end of it? And our commitment is when you pay us money for a design, we will get you to the finish line where you're ready to go ahead. The design may need to be compromised from what you initially had envisioned, but that's dependent on what your budget and what your realities are all about. And so we work with clients to get to the finish line. A finish line for us is a happy client once the project has been installed. And we've taken them down that whole road of helping them identify their concept, identifying their dream, clarifying their dream, or even just putting their dream onto paper and showing them what that looks like as a landscape design. And then using our expertise to make sure there's not going to be these roadblocks, these unforeseens, these obstacles, these issues that pop up along the way. We'll identify that in the estimating stage. We'll estimate the design, show the client what they're up against in terms of budget. And then we review, revise, and then we build. And that build part is fundamental because I have taken so many times this happens where we get a design from a client who got the design done elsewhere. And it, without spending the month it takes to really work on the design ourselves and understand the client's values and the site conditions and the challenges with it. And without spending that time in the design phase, we don't really, it's hard to know when you just get an estimate design, all of those considerations can't really be involved. So you start a project on someone else's design and every single time that is going to go up by 20 to 100% because there's all these things. Well, this won't work because of this reason. Well, because you're doing that, have you thought about doing this? Because it would look a whole lot better. Or have you considered this material? It would save you X amount of money. And so as we go through the project, there's a lot of these stop and starts because the design really hasn't been thought through thoroughly enough. When you work with a design build company like Hyland, All of that gets ironed out in the design phase. And if it doesn't, it's on us. We have to identify all of these things to the best of our ability. And that's what makes Hyland the best design build firm you can choose for your landscape project, because we've got that diverse expertise and we're very integral and we've got brilliant designers.